So I've been thinking a little bit in these days about the mental factors of attachment and arrogance because of the drama around the Supreme Court nominee. And so there's a lot of people involved in that who have a lot of worldly ambition. So that ambition is a form of attachment. And it seems to me there's a lot of arrogance as well, a feeling of deserving something, of entitlement. And relating that to my own life and our own lives, to look at when we have worldly ambition, when we want to attain certain positions or be recognized in a certain way. And when we feel entitled to it because of whatever it is, what we've studied, what we've done, who we know, how we were raised, what schools we went to. And so we may be able to get the object of our worldly ambition, and our arrogance may triumph in the situation. But since we don't have the view of multiple lifetimes, we don't see what else is involved with that. So those kind of things are not standalone situations, but in fulfilling our worldly ambitions with the mind of great attachment. Excuse me. In doing that, with the attachment, the arrogance, the anger that's involved, we create a lot of karma. And although we may not experience the result of those actions in this lifetime, those seeds remain on our mind stream. And whether we believe in rebirth or not, the mental consciousness continues, the mere I continues, not as something inherently existent or findable, but simply as a dependent arising. And then those karmas ripen in the future lives. And so it's often the case that the people who have high positions in one life, if their minds were involved with attachment, anger, arrogance, and so on, in getting those positions or what they did once they had them, then since they've created so much negativity in the future lives, they're born in a lowly position. So it's strange that the people who seem victorious in one life aren't aware of the long-term consequences of their thoughts and speech and actions, how those will ripen in another lifetime. So for us, it's very important to check our minds and make sure we don't have those kind of mental factors when we're acting. And whenever we feel that we're in a lowly position, realize it's the result of our own self-centeredness in previous lives, our own afflicted mental states and actions. And of course, the lowly should do whatever they can to have equal rights, because human rights are human rights for everybody. but rather than getting angry at the situation, accept the result of our own karma, and then change our own mental state so that we, in the future, work for the benefit of others and not simply seek our own prestige. So all these situations that we see happening around us with the nomination, they're all incredible Dharma teachings, especially about karma and the power of afflictions. So if we can sprinkle some compassion in there, it would certainly help the situation. Not to mention to sprinkle some wisdom as well. And some detachment, some renunciation of worldly pleasures and status, so that the mind cools down. There's space in the mind to think of the welfare of others. So, in order to learn how to do that, we're going to be listening to His Holiness's teachings this evening for the long-term purpose of being of great benefit to all living beings. So, of course, saying what I said, I'm imputing motivations on people. I can't read their minds. I don't know their motivations. So I might be incorrect about other people's motivations, but still, it's a good Dharma teaching, if we realize, if we can take a situation and see the big picture in it, and then relate it to ourselves and our own actions. Yeah. Is that getting communicated okay? Yeah. So, when we just have a vision of this life, our minds are so narrow, and we think, I got the worldly success that I wanted. Now people will admire me. I'm fulfilling my goal. I'm somebody. I have power. I was entitled to it because of whatever it is. And thinking that that's the end of the story. Without thinking of the results of their own actions, what they thought and said and did to get there. And then once they're there, the kinds of karmas they create through acting and speaking and so on. Yeah. So it's really good for us to always have that kind of perspective because it really helps to cut that worldly grasping, especially for status and recognition. Because you see, okay, you got it this life because of some causes and conditions, and that karma is getting used up. And then if I was arrogant and attached and so on, angry, then next life's not going to be so good. So I shouldn't complain, when I get to my next life. But of course we will. Yeah, because we always complain. But this is, one of the things they really advise us in thought training is instead of complaining and being angry, say, this is a result of my own actions. Yeah. Of course, and it's really important when you say that, to say that prevents you from being angry and creating more negative karma. It does not mean that you are apathetic about the situation and don't try and remedy injustice. It does not mean that. Okay, that needs to be very clearly spelled out, because otherwise some people think, oh, I just blame myself and okay, I just sit there. Because no, I mean, especially if it's a whole class of people that are suffering from oppression, then it's important to speak up, but to speak up without anger. That's the challenge. To speak up without anger, without making it us and them. Yeah, but seeing that we're all stuck in this soup of cyclic existence. Communicating? Yeah. So, Dharma is very helpful to understand political situations, which are otherwise incomparable, or no, incomprehensible. Yeah, they're incomparable too, but. Okay, so we're on chapter 3, mind and emotions. Okay, so we've been seeing a lot. This has been quite an emotional week, hasn't it? In the media, it's like, emotions all over the place. Oh, the first sentence says, we are emotional beings. Our feelings of pleasure or pain provoke different emotions, and our emotions motivate us to act. So, in the 12 links, you have the seventh link of feeling, and that brings on, that's the cause for the 8th link of craving, the 9th link of clinging. So it's really saying we have feelings, and here feelings means pleasure, pain, and neutral. Feeling does not mean emotion. It means those feelings of pleasure, pain, and neutral. And those instigate, or they prompt, craving. So we crave to, not be separated from, or to have more of the pleasant feeling. We crave to be free of the unpleasant feelings and whatever seems to provoke that. And we also crave that the neutral feelings don't totally disappear unless they turn into happy ones. Then that's okay. Okay. And then motivated by that craving, okay, then we act. So it's always this thing of ignorance or afflictions that then spark emotions that then bring karma, that create actions, and the actions bring the resultant situation in cyclic existence. Okay, so it's a whole system of causality there. Okay, some of our emotions are afflictive and unrealistic. Others are more realistic and beneficial. As a result, some of our actions bring more pain, while others bring happiness. Learning to differentiate destructive from constructive emotions so we can subdue the former and nurture the latter is a worthy endeavor on a personal as well as a societal level. Okay, so remember, constructive and destructive emotions doesn't mean emotions that make you feel happy right now, and destructive doesn't mean emotions that make you feel unhappy right now. Okay, here we're talking about constructive and destructive in terms of their long-term results. Okay, not just how they are now, because otherwise, somebody who's mad at somebody else and beats them up and feels very happy afterwards. Oh, I beat up my enemy. Then would you say that's a positive action because the person feels happy? I don't think so. Okay. Buddhists have eliminated all afflictive emotions, but that does not mean that they are emotionally flat, apathetic, and unreceptive to human contact. In fact, it is the opposite. By going through the gradual process of overcoming destructive emotions, such as greed and anger, Buddhists have built up and expanded constructive emotions, such as love and compassion. Due to this inner transformation, their work in the world is wiser and more effective. In this chapter, you'll be introduced to the Buddhist view of emotions, comparing and contrasting that view with Western paradigms. We'll also examine how specific emotions affect our daily life and how to work with difficult emotions and cultivate positive ones. Okay, so Buddhism, science, and emotions. And so these next kind of sections where it's talking about science came from some of the Mind and Life conferences, the very early ones that I was able to attend. I haven't been to them in quite a long time, so I can't speak about the latest developments. Buddhists and scientists have some similar and some very different ideas about emotions. In general, scientists describe an emotion as having three components. Okay, so first, a physiological component, second, an experiential component, and third, a behavioral component. So this is one psychological paradigm. I'm sure there's lots of them. Okay, the physiological component includes the chemical and electrical changes in the brain, as well as the galvanic skin response, heart rate, and other changes in the body. The experiential component is the subjective experience, the psychological mood or feeling aspect of the emotion. And the behavioral aspect includes the words and actions of a person motivated by that emotion. Yeah. So from a scientific view, when we have emotion, all three of these are considered the emotion. From a Buddhist viewpoint, these three may all be present, but they aren't considered the emotion itself. Okay. But we can look in our experience when we have an emotion, there's often a physical response. Yeah, if you're angry, your heart rate, goes up, or your face gets flushed, things, parts of your brain light up. Yeah, you have the experiential component of the anger itself, and then you have the behavioral component of how you speak and act as a result of that. Okay? From the Buddhist perspective, emotions are mental states and subjective experiences. They may be accompanied by changes in the body's physiology, but the brain's activities are not the emotion itself. Okay, so this is a big difference, because I don't know what if there's an agreement among scientists, but when they research emotions, they're always looking at what's going on in the brain. Now, do they say that the physiological and electrical things in the brain are the emotion? I'm not sure what they say is the emotion. Does anybody know? You don't know? No. Yeah, or maybe they're just saying it has these three components somehow. Yeah, but it's it's hard for them to identify exactly what an emotion is, because the whole experiential part of our lives are not really open to scientific investigation, because they're not things that can be measured by scientific tools. Yeah. And so I think a lot of times those things are ignored because they aren't understood from a scientific viewpoint. Yeah? Okay, so you think they Okay, so you think they focus more on the behaviors because those can be seen and measured, and others probably focus more on the body's response. Yeah, but the whole experiential aspect is kind of lost. That's considered subjective, and so is not a reliable thing to investigate.
Or they investigate it in anthropology now, and so they'll get written, they'll interview and get all that content and then put that through some filters and
Okay.
make some statements about
it. Yeah. Okay. From the Buddhist perspective, emotions are mental states and subjective experiences. They may be accompanied by changes in the body's physiology, but the brain's activities are not the emotion itself. For example, if we put some live brain cells in a Petri dish in front of us, we would not say their chemical and electrical interactions were anger or affection. Would you? Yeah. Because anger and affection are internal mental experiences of a living being. Yeah. Anger and affection are not the chemical, electrical things going on between the cells. But that neurological activity is not the experience of anger. Similarly, an emotion may lead to an action, but that action is an effect of the emotion, not the emotion itself. Consequently, of the three components mentioned above, Buddhists speak of emotions only in terms of the second one, what we experience, feel, and think. Okay? If we talk about the behavior, then we're talking about karma. If we're talking about the physiology, then we're talking about science. Okay? From a Buddhist viewpoint. Buddhism does not deny that the body and mind affect and influence each other. When our knee hits the table, our mind experiences pain, and we may become irritated. When our mind is calm, our physical health improves. In commentary on reliable cognition, Dharmakirti says that when the body is healthy, attachment to sexual pleasure increases in the mind, whereas when the body is weak, anger arises more easily. True? From your own experience? Okay. On a subtler level, certain emotions correlate with specific chemical and electrical changes in the brain. Does this correlation indicate a cause and effect relationship? Science has made fascinating discoveries correlating certain cognitive and emotional states with specific areas in the brain and particular neuron activity. But we must be careful not to attribute causality when there is mere correlation. Yeah, so this is important because I think this is where some people get confused. They think, oh, that's happening in the brain, so that's what's causing the feeling. So if we change the brain and the physiological thing, then we're solving the mental problem as well. But that's not always the case. Whereas some scientists believe that physiological events in the brain cause the emotions, Buddhists think that in general, the emotional states precede the physiological changes. This is an important area open for research, and in recent years, many scientists have begun to explore it. And that's really continuing now. I mean, they have whole departments on research into contemplative science. Yeah, okay. But regardless of whether the subtle changes in the brain are caused by or simply correlate with emotions, Buddhism emphasizes that emotions and feelings are mental states in living beings. Without mind, there is no experience. So this is, again, where science gets stuck, because it doesn't really know what mind is. Yeah. And if mind is, just an emergent property of the brain, again, it's they don't really know how to get a handle on it. But from a Buddhist viewpoint, without mind, and remember, mind is that which is clear and cognizant, so it's not made of form or matter, and yet it's what has the power to know objects and engage with objects. So without the mind, there is no experience. Yeah. A corpse certainly doesn't have love or hatred, and a group of neurons or a cluster of genes does not feel pleasure or pain. Okay, so again, here there's some differences here. Living beings do. Feelings, emotions, thoughts, views, attitudes, and so forth occur in the mind. They are mental states experienced by living beings. Physical things in and of themselves can't cognize or experience. We don't say that when I, hit the table, that the table experiences pain. Okay. Or when I go like this, that now the table's purring. Yeah. Okay. It's human beings that have these, or living beings, I should say, that have these experiences. So these mental states motivate our physical and verbal actions. It is unreasonable and even dangerous to say my biological makeup makes me harm others. Okay, so people are not saying that out loud, that directly. But there's kind of an undertone with some people that because of certain physiological makeup, then you are predestined to have certain behavior or certain mental states or act in certain ways. And, to the point where it would be so easy to get to the point, and it probably says it lower, to say, well, I'm an alcoholic because I got the genes from my parents. So I'm not responsible for my alcoholism or for my behavior because it's all caused by whatever my genes are doing and whatever the physiology in my brain is happening. So I don't have any personal responsibility for this. Okay, that could be so dangerous, couldn't it? It could also lead to people thinking, okay, let's get everybody's genetic code and check out how their brain is functioning. And then people who have these genes or these brain functions are deemed dangerous to society. And so let's kill them now before they harm other people. Okay? If you start saying everything is physical, it's really a slippery slope. Yeah. Okay. I'm amazed. I say things and then the next sentence has those words. You can tell who wrote this. Such an attitude leads down the slippery slope of abdicating responsibility for our actions by attributing their causes to physical elements over which we have no control. In addition to creating a sense of powerlessness in us, I was born with that gene, I can't do anything about it. Okay, it could be used to justify eliminating individuals with certain genetic or neurological makeups. And that is very dangerous. And this, in some ways, is what, in the States, the eugenics movement, was trying to prove in the 19th and 20th century. It's what the Nazis were trying to prove. Okay, so it's really a slippery slope, this one. The vast majority of our physical and verbal actions are prompted by intentions in our minds. And these intentions are influenced by our feelings, emotions, and views. Okay, intention, the mental factor of intention, is also karma. Okay? Although many of our intentions are very subtle, and some seem more like primal urges than conceived plans, they are present nonetheless. The fact that our intentions and emotions are the forces behind what we say and do means that by changing them, we can transform our actions and our lives. We are not doomed to a life circumscribed by the limitations of our genes, neural pathways, and biological processes over which we have very little choice or control. So those things may influence us, but, we don't have to feel that they are the things that are in control. Yeah. So you might say, but wait a minute, as you get older, your body can't do what it does before, and then that influences your mood. So isn't that all physiologically controlled? Well, yes, the body getting older, and that influences what you can do. Yeah. But how you react to that is something under your own personal control. If you make it under your own control, if you take that possibility and that choice, and then say, okay, I have a few different options how I can deal with this situation. One is to say, I'm getting old, woe is me, my body's falling apart, I'm a useless person. Another is to say, okay, I'm getting older, my body can't do what it used to be, but boy, I am a whole lot wiser than I used to be, and I would not go back and exchange, doing all the stupid things I did before, creating so much negative karma before for the state now, even though my body is not as cooperative now. Or you could have the idea of, okay, I'm aging, and my body can't do what, it used to, and I need help. And I'm going to really try and give something to the people who help me. Instead of feeling embarrassed, instead of feeling like I'm imposing, I'm going to really try and share what I've learned in life with the people who are helping me. And I'm going to try and age gracefully and be a kind older person, not one that's complaining about everything. Yeah. So there's many choices within that. And how we choose, that's our mental attitude, that we can cultivate one attitude and apply antidotes to the other one. Okay? So this is something we can control by working with cause and effect. It doesn't mean that I'm just going to say, okay, from now on, I'm never going to be grouchy, because that's not going to change everything. But okay, from now on, I really want to work at not being grouchy. How do I create the causes for not being grouchy? How do I abandon the causes for my grouchiness? And then you work like that, trying to create certain causes and abandon other causes, instead of expecting yourself to change on a dime, because that doesn't happen. Okay, but what I'm getting at is, if we attribute too much influence to the body and the genes and the physiology, then it's so easy to become depressed when your body doesn't do what you want it to do and doesn't do what it used to do. Yeah. Whereas if we don't have that view, if we see, okay, the body is like it says in the 37 practices, it's the guest house. It's simply a guest house that our consciousness is in. So sometimes your guest house is, it's fallen apart. There's the paint is chipping and the linoleum, because they put linoleum in many years ago, The old linoleum is all marked up. Yeah, the 1950s linoleum. Yeah. So the guest house is like that. But I can still be happy living in an old room. I don't have to have the newest, fanciest room. Yeah. Anyway, do you really want to walk around in 5-inch high heels now? Yeah. Do you really want to have the newest fashion and go through all that stuff and, check your hair and check your makeup and, 5-inch heels and, worry about the clothes? Do you really want to go back and do that? Yeah. Do you want to stand for photographs? How are they all standing now? You have to put your hand on your hip somehow. And then look sexy. How do you look sexy? Yeah, I look at Melania, because she shows this. You don't close your mouth the whole way, a little bit open. Is she visualizing Donnie in front? I don't think so. No, Okay. Do you really want to go and do that with your life now? Yeah. Guys, do you really want to go and, build up your muscles and, take your t-shirt off and swagger around, Okay. There's some definite advantages to getting older, aren't there? Yeah? You don't have to do all that stuff. Okay. Okay. Well, we still have to deal with the effects of genetic and physiological processes. We need not develop a defeatist attitude regarding them. We have human intelligence and the seeds of love, compassion, wisdom, and other magnificent qualities inside us. These can be consciously developed, and many great sages in a variety of cultures and spiritual traditions have done this. Yeah, it's really amazing. I remember my, my first Dharma teachers, most of them, because I came along kind of at the end of when these really great masters were alive, Kyabje Ling Rinpoche, Trichum Rinpoche, Serkum Rinpoche, these very great masters. And they were in their 80s. And they were, their bodies old. You look at the pictures, they're old. And they sat on their bed most of the day. But their minds were so happy. Yeah. And they were happy people. And they were doing what they loved. And they felt fulfilled. Yeah. And so, if you have a strong practice, then it doesn't matter your body's like that. Yeah. Your life can be very, very vibrant. Many years ago, I challenged one of the scientists, this is His Holiness speaking, challenged one of the scientists in our Mind and Life dialogues to research the effects of cultivating well-being and positive emotions on the brain. After investigating for some years, he reported that due to a combination of the brain's neuroplasticity and people's meditation practice, there were changes in the brain circuits of people who cultivated 4 selected qualities: resilience, positive outlook, attention, and generosity. Okay, so these are things that where they train people, and they saw these changes. So each of these had corresponding Buddhist practices to develop them. Resilience is the speed with which we recover from adversity. A positive outlook is seeing the basic goodness in others and letting that influence all that we do. Attention is the ability to focus on an object and enables us to complete what we begin. And generosity is an attitude of giving and sharing. All of these activate brain circuits that are correlated with a sense of well-being. The researchers' conclusion was that well-being can be learned. So they've been developing programs that teach meditation and mindfulness and using them in schools, hospitals, and so forth with great success. Okay? So much of our well-being depends on what we think and how we think. And that's something that we can learn, something that we can change. Yeah, so these programs, like Geshe Dado was talking about the cognitive-based compassion training, okay? CBCT, yeah. And so teaching these kinds of things, even to young children, then you can start to teach people how to work with their own emotions. And this also, because of neuroplasticity, affects the brain circuits. Okay, now the section on happiness and unhappiness, virtue and non-virtue. Well, both Buddhism and psychology seek to help people have more happiness and fulfillment and decrease their unhappiness and misery. They differ somewhat in what they consider positive and negative emotions. Some psychologists and scientists I have spoken with say that a negative emotion is one that feels bad and makes the person unhappy at the time it is manifest in the mind. A positive emotion makes the person feel happy at the time it is manifest. So that's kind of their schema. In Buddhism, what differentiates positive and negative emotions is not our immediate feeling of happiness or discomfort, but the happiness or suffering that is the long-term result of those emotions. That's what I was talking about earlier. That is, because the long-term effects of our actions are considered more important than their short-term effects, which tend to be fleeting in comparison. If in the long term an emotion produces unpleasant experiences, it is considered negative. If it brings happiness in the long term, it is positive. Buddhism explains that virtuous or positive, constructive, wholesome emotions lead to happiness in the long term, while non-virtuous, negative, destructive, unwholesome emotions lead to suffering in the long term. Okay, so it's interesting in Buddhism, what are defined as constructive and destructive emotions, or virtuous and non-virtuous mental factors, depends on the long-term result. Okay, which is not necessarily visible to us. Okay, and so it isn't that some actions are inherently bad and some actions are inherently good, but rather things are deemed virtuous or non-virtuous because of the results they bring. And so the Buddha, who had the power to see what kind of results different actions brought, and the power to see that when people were experiencing certain things, what the causal actions were, then, that's how he labeled and designated things. So it's not is very different than in a theistic religion where the creator made up the rules and decide what's good and what's bad. In Buddhism, nobody made up the rules. The Buddhists simply described this based on the results that living beings experience. The Buddha presented 4 scenarios in which present happiness, pain, and virtue, non-virtue are at play. So I think this is quite interesting here. Okay. So here, when someone feels a certain kind of pleasant feeling, non-virtuous states increase in him, and virtuous states diminish. That's the first option. Okay. Second option. But when someone feels another kind of pleasant feeling, non-virtuous states diminish in him, and virtuous states increase. Okay. Then, third option. Here, when someone feels a certain kind of painful feeling, non-virtuous states increase in him, and virtuous states diminish. And then 4. But when someone feels another kind of painful feeling, non-virtuous states diminish in him, and virtuous states increase. So there are those 4. And there are some examples afterwards, but before we read the examples, did all of you read ahead? Okay, so let's see if you can make examples of these 4 alternatives, okay? So what's an example of someone, and don't look at the follows, you have to think of your own example. So what's an example when someone feels a pleasant feeling and non-virtuous activities increase and virtuous states diminish? What's an example of that? Yeah? You want to pass the mic back? And describe also what kind of pleasant feeling it is that makes this happen.
A pleasant feeling arising from eating chocolate cake, and then attachment arising, wanting a second piece, and the virtuous mind of wanting to just eat to sustain the body to be a benefit to others decreases as your attachment takes hold.
Yeah. And then it causes karma because you run up to get seconds because I want it before somebody else gets that chocolate. Okay. Even if I've had my own share already, and even if I believe everything should be equally distributed, I want another piece of chocolate. Forget everybody else. Okay? Okay. Then what's an example? Yeah, that's a simple kind of example. Yeah. But what's an example when someone feels another kind of pleasant feeling and non-virtuous states diminish in him and virtuous states increase? What would be an example of that? Okay.
A person gets up from their meditation session in the morning and feels like their mind is open and they're ready to face the day in a happy way. So that their motivation is clear, their grumpy mind that they might have come to the hall with has diminished, and their it sets the tone for the whole day.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a good example. Mm-hmm. Then, what's an example of a certain kind of painful feeling that makes non-virtuous states increase and virtuous states diminish? Painful feeling, yeah.
And somebody feels jealousy because one person got a raise and you didn't, and they start to feel vindictive thoughts or malicious thoughts towards the person.
Yeah. Okay. So the painful feeling here is not the jealousy, it's the unhappiness. Yeah, that comes. So because of being unhappy, because someone got the raise, then wanting to do something nasty. Okay. And then what's the example when someone feels another kind of painful feeling and non-virtuous states diminish in him and virtuous states increase?
So the person who ate the second piece of chocolate cake has a stomach ache,
and they conclude, I can't do this anymore. I shouldn't be greedy.
Yep. Uh-huh. Okay, good. So this is something quite interesting, you know. During the day, watch your feelings and watch whether you have virtuous or non-virtuous mental states arise in response to them. And try and make it so that whatever pleasurable or painful feeling you have, you can use it to create a virtuous mental state instead of a non-virtuous one. So this thought-provoking citation is worthy of some illustrations. As it says, there are 4 possible permutations of feelings and ethical value. Okay, sound familiar? Does your study and debate help you with this a little bit? In the first, a pleasant feeling accompanies the increase of non-virtue and the decrease of virtue. An example is feeling happy when we successfully deceive others about a vile action we have committed. Yeah. I mean, is this an example of what's going on now? Feeling very happy about, you know, you know what I'm talking about, and yeah, and yeah, but it's only increasing non-virtue, only increasing non-virtue. Even though it may be accompanied by a pleasant feeling, our action is not virtuous since it is the cause of future suffering. And that's what's going on with this whole thing with the nomination. Yeah.
So we're analyzing how the feelings give rise to non-virtue or virtue.
Mm-hmm.
But how about if the feelings that we're experiencing and the actions that we do then help to kind of provide the environment for non-virtue to arise in others?
Mm-hmm.
Can
you give me an example? You're talking about doing this and our actions are not affecting us and not creating karma ourselves?
No, what I'm saying is that, so for example, in this situation where the negative actions of a person are being passed off as okay or looked over, and the person seems to be rewarded for those bad actions, then of course then that the result of that is that other people's non-virtue increase because they feel that it's okay, there is some acceptance. And so what I'm saying is, does the person then gain some bad karma as a result of that, having caused others to non-virtue to arise in others?
Okay, that person didn't have the motivation to cause others. I mean, if they had this motivation that, okay, by acting in this way, then, by, sexually assaulting women, I'll let all the young men know that that's completely okay to do. If they're thinking like that, then that's negativity causing others, But if they're just doing it, let's say, to defend their own reputation, it's negative, but they're not deliberately making somebody else do non-virtue. So there's a difference between just creating the circumstances and having the intention to, make somebody create that non-virtue. Yeah. Okay. But in general, the negative effect is still there. If from this whole thing, boys say, well, it's okay, and, you can do this and no adverse circumstances come to you, so I'll just go ahead and do it, I mean, then those young men are creating a lot of non-virtue. Plus, the person who's setting that example is creating the non-virtue for themselves. But if they think, oh, I'm going to get all the boys on my side and teach them how great this is, then it's kind of doubled. Okay. Yeah. Okay. In the second, there is a pleasant feeling when a non-virtuous state decreases and a virtuous one increases. An example is taking delight in making a generous offering to a charity that helps refugees or the poor and hungry. This kind of happiness is win-win. We feel joyful now, and our actions create the causes for future happiness for self and others, and very directly create the cause of happiness for the refugees or the poor and so forth. Yeah, so this is rejoicing in one's own merit, which is an important thing to do. The third occurs when an unpleasant feeling accompanies an increase in non-virtue and a decrease in virtue. An example is the pain of someone who angrily rejects being sentenced to prison after being convicted of embezzlement. Not taking responsibility for his non-virtuous action, he angrily blames others, creating more non-virtue. Oh my goodness. I didn't know we were going to... when this was written, I didn't know I was going to be going over this now when we have such living examples of it. It's incredible, isn't it? If he accepted responsibility for his action and regretted it, his virtue would increase and his pain would lead him to change his ways. So that would be an example of an unpleasant feeling leading to create virtue. But by not accepting responsibility, it just leads to more non-virtue. In the fourth situation, we have a painful feeling, but our non-virtue diminishes and our virtue increases. An example is taking a lower-paying job to avoid having to lie to clients or customers. In this case, creating virtue that would bring happiness in the future and peace of mind right now also brings some unhappiness of a loss in income. But it is undoubtedly worthwhile in the long term. Yeah, we were talking in the car today about if the nominee just had, a month or two ago withdrawn his nomination, how much non-virtue would not have been created by a lot of people, and how much unhappiness would not have been experienced by millions of people.
Even if he just said, you know what, I did drink a lot when I was young, I blacked out, and I am now an adult and I don't do that anymore, I regret my action, and leave it at that. I've learned from my mistake and I have a new view and I respect women, something like that.
Yeah, people would definitely respect that. Yeah. But you see is this whole thing of the arrogance and the ambition of I'm going to admit no fault because I don't have faults. Yeah, and then as a result, the whole country is getting put through something that is very harmful in the long term because a lot of people will lose faith in the Senate and in the judicial system. And a lot of people will feel that the judicial system does not do anything to protect them. And this is harmful for all of society, isn't it? For the entire country, for people to think like this. So it's just an incredible living technicolor, teaching us to be careful so that we never act like that. Yeah. So it's not a situation always to blame and point fingers, but say, I have those same mental factors. May I be very careful so that I never treat other living beings in that way, or I never think or act in that way.
That was making me think about, I think it's the Buddha who said that Buddhism would decline from the inside, right? Mm-hmm. So this is watching our government decline from the inside.
Yes.
And so it really is a warning.
Yeah. Very much a warning. Yeah. Many things decline from the inside, not from the outside. Yeah. Making some examples of these from your own experience is useful. Such an exercise helps us to value our ethical integrity more than the fleeting happiness of getting what we want at the moment. Since our self-esteem and feelings of self-worth depend more on our ethical integrity than on sensual pleasure, it is worthwhile to take the time to remind ourselves of these values before an impulse arises, so that when the time comes, we will make wise decisions. Yeah. So then, the reflection. So this is homework for you. When you act against your ethical values, how do you feel at the moment of doing the action? How do you feel later when reflecting on your action? These are also questions for discussion groups, to have a discussion group on some of these things. And the second, when you give up an immediate pleasure due to your sense of personal integrity or for the sake of long-term happiness, how do you feel at the time? How do you feel later when reflecting on your action? And then third, how integral is ethical conduct to your happiness? Based on what you conclude here, make some determinations about how you want to live. Yeah. Have you ever done something that was really nasty? You felt really good about it after you did it, and then afterwards you felt really crummy? Yeah, can you think of specific things that you did? Yeah. It's amazing how we don't forget those things. Yeah, when we don't feel good about ourselves because we didn't keep good ethical conduct, yeah, there's that memory stays. So the thing to do is, instead of feeling guilty about it and holding on to that guilt, to say, I'm going to learn from that mistake and I'm not going to do that kind of thing again. Yeah. So that's the way to deal with those kind of situations, instead of just stuffing them down and saying, oh, I don't want to admit I did that. I don't want to look at that. Get rid of it. It's just, like you were saying, take responsibility and say, I did it and I regret it and I'm changing. Yeah, that's exactly what you just said. It's not easy, but it's the way to heal.
I was thinking that what came to mind for me was more of a tendency in this. Like I was thinking, and I once made like a commitment to myself to think about this for 2 years, so that I would change a habit. And what it was like, being so opinionated, and then seeing what, it might feel like a certain way at a time that I think in the past felt positive, but now it doesn't actually to me. I'm watching it. But in the past that would come up, and the way I communicated then really wasn't working. And so I made a commitment to just, for 2 years, to look at this and try to improve upon that. And I find that it takes quite a while. So I think that's a good method, is to find one thing that you want to focus on and then do it for a long time. And then it really does change.
Yeah.
You don't act in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, it requires that focus and repetition. Yeah. Okay, emotions and kleshas. Before going deeper with the discussion of emotions, we need to clarify terms. Although everyone in the West understands the meaning of the word emotion, there is not a parallel word in Tibetan. Okay? This came up in the discussions this time too. When I, Chudran, was reviewing this chapter with His Holiness, he and his translators engaged in a lengthy discussion about the meaning of emotion and how it could be translated into Tibetan. Some Tibetans suggest the Tibetan word nyonshor as a translation, although this word is not widely used. Etymologically, nyon means experience and sor means feeling. Both of these qualities pertain to other mental states that are not emotions. Other Tibetans have proposed the word gerbak, found in Gyaltsabche's commentary to Dharmakirti's commentary on reliable cognition. However, it is an archaic word and does not include what in English we consider positive emotions. Okay. Our discussion led to the conclusion that at present there is no widely used Tibetan word that directly translates the meaning of the English word emotion. However, the Tibetan language contains words for the various emotions spoken of in Western languages. The lack of a term and concept for emotion piqued my interest because those of us in the West continually talk about our emotions, don't we? Yeah. I imagined what it would be like to grow up in a culture that wasn't so focused on my emotions. Yeah. And it really made me think, when you grow up in a culture where everybody's talking about my emotions and what I feel and why I feel this and, how other people made me feel this and, how my feelings, when your culture is like that, you grow up with a certain kind of attitude towards your emotions and a certain way of behaving with respect to talking about your emotions. And I thought, now, if you don't even have the word emotion, then in a society, then by lacking that word, that the whole way you approach some of the inner psychological workings of your mind is going to be very different. Yeah. And it was also making me think, because even, 2 centuries ago, I think about in the US, because now everybody's talking my emotions, okay? But when you think about the times in the 19th century during the westward expansion, and all these people in their covered wagons and, going out for the gold boom, gold mining and going here and doing this and that. Of course, they had many emotions, but I don't think they talked about them much because they were just trying to stay alive. And, when you're crossing the desert in a covered wagon and you have a limited supply of food, you don't really have time to think, when you looked at me in that particular way, it made me feel like you don't love me anymore. And I really have problems with our relationship because we aren't communicating very well. I mean, who talked like that then? Nobody had time to. You're just trying to stay alive. Okay? So it made me think, how much society has changed, due to this constant attention to my inner feelings as being the most important thing. And I remember when I was in school, especially, college and afterward, I spent hours and hours and days and months and years analyzing my emotions, talking about my emotions, doing everything about my emotions and how deeply I feel things. Yeah, you're another one like this, aren't you? Yeah. No, we've talked about it before when we came to the app. We feel things so deeply, and our feelings are always so present, and they move us so much, and we want to talk about them and work them out and make sense of them and analyze them and change the world's external circumstances so that my feelings will change. You see Sarah Bernhardt? Okay. Yeah. Hold on a second. So, imagine, I have the luxury of wasting so much time doing that. Now, in this kind of culture, yeah, I'm wasting, some of it was valuable, some of it was just self-centered rumination. My goodness, But 200 years ago, my ancestors in the shtetl that were going through pogroms, they weren't sitting there talking about this. And this wasn't what their life focused on. Yeah. So it's quite interesting to think, about how society has changed, how the way we relate to people has changed because of this emphasis on emotions. Yeah. And so, granted, people, even my parents' generation, they didn't talk about emotions like that. You're growing up in the middle of the Depression. Yeah. Trying to find some food is, it's not like, you can sit there and, oh, I feel so angry because, the person downstairs is making so much noise. You didn't have that luxury at that time. And, so it's nice that people are more emotionally aware nowadays, and are thinking about how they communicate, how they express emotions and everything. But at the same time, have we gone overboard with the whole thing? And like I said, I spent so long, always, every little thing was about my emotions. And it's like, I just reached a certain point in my life where, boring, let's get on and do something instead of just talking about how I feel all day long, Yeah, you remember any of you do that? Yeah. Did you do that? No? Oh, okay. Okay, anybody else?
I do agree with you that we went overboard and now it's call me he or she or I don't know the terms now, and the bathroom and all that stuff and me and I. But in the time also we had slavery, rape overboard, killing, and so on and so on and so on. We're just human growing up, getting wiser or trying to get wiser.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's just a process.
Yes.
Into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yes, it's sometimes it is a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. I wasn't going back to, the good old days when we didn't have to talk about emotions because we were just trying to keep the buffalo from, destroying our covered wagon. I'm not a fantasizer about the good old days. Yeah.
I'm still thinking about having a word and not having a word for something.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think about how we currently talk about our emotions in the West. It's almost as if it has form, almost within us, something that kind of grows or is almost its own being that afflicts us. And we give it such solidity. And I'm wondering if that's why we're so, well, we're apt to actually give it a word, because to us it has form and solidity. Yeah. Whereas other cultures, it's just so much more transient.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually have a form.
Yeah.
Am I?
Yeah. I don't think you mean like an actual physical form. It just feels like. Exactly. We perceive it as almost like that. Yeah, we perceive it as almost like that. We don't actually think it does, but, you know. Yeah, and I think that really influences how we think and act in a culture, you know, so much. Because it was at one of these Mind and Life conferences, it was also quite remarkable. We started talking about the Tibetans that were refugees having to flee in 59, or also around 1990, a little bit before and after 1990. A lot of people came out of Tibet as refugees. And we were talking about, because many of them had been through incredibly traumatic experiences, you know. There was a group of nuns that had come out that had had cattle prods put up their vagina and, you know, just, I mean, horrible things. And then you look, but they kind of, you know, they're functioning. Yeah, they're not totally kind of incapacitated by what happened to them. And so there really appeared to be a very different way of regarding experiences and creating emotions out of those experiences. Yeah, because His Holiness was saying, you know, there were a few Tibetans who had PTSD, but not like the Westerners would have expected. The Western psychologists who came over would have expected, you know, so many more people with trauma, but that wasn't the case. Yeah. So it's quite interesting, you know, how we think of our emotions influences how we experience them too.
I think about how we think about our emotions. And there was a time in my life when I was quite young where I thought of them as this is a deep part of myself, you know, and to try and deal with them and change them was considered, I was considering that to be repressing them. But also I think about in our society, I think that we have a lot of, it goes on in dramas and stuff. Now it's in movies and, you know, modern books where we, there's emotions played out in these things where they're not talked about, but as such, maybe not in a way we talk about them as, with a psychological point of view, but they're evoked purposely through certain scenes. And this goes way back. This goes way back to like the King Arthur romance stories, you know, where people are they're moved by their emotions and they're really clinging to emotions that are not healthy. Yeah, anger or seeing this, what would you call it? Obsessed attachment as love, and they're, you know, I mean, Romeo and Juliet. You know, but the Arthur stories are much older than that.
Yeah.
So I think this has been in our society, but it's not been looked at in the way that Freud and Jung and such looked at it. You know, and now we look at it a little different that way. But I think about how we look at it as part of ourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we say feelings are an aggregate, but there's this emotional element that we really cling to as me,
Yeah.
my sorrow or my joy. And
Yeah. And this is who I am.
this is who I
You know,
am.
My emotional makeup is who I am. An English dictionary, okay, we'll finish this section. An English dictionary defines emotion as a strong feeling about somebody or something. The word feeling or Vedana is also vague and is already used in Buddhist translations to indicate the aggregate of pleasant or happy, unpleasant or unhappy, painful, or neutral experiences. Okay, so feeling is, pleasure, pain, neutral. It doesn't mean emotions in Buddhist psychology. This aggregate does not include what we would call feelings in English, such as anger or love. The Sanskrit word klesha is a commonly used word in Buddhist texts that refers to mental factors that afflict the mind and do not allow it to abide peacefully. These disturbing emotions and views enslave the mind, confining it to a narrow perspective, and motivate actions that hinder the happiness of both ourselves and others. As such, klesha are obscurations on the path to liberation, and the Buddhist texts speak of their disadvantages and the antidotes to them. Okay, so instead of having this category of emotions like we do in the West, there's a category of kleshas. And what makes something a klesha is if it afflicts the mind. Okay, so the definition of klesha is very different than the definition of emotion in the West. And so while we talk about kleshas, and many kleshas include negative emotions, and they're things that we want to get rid of on the path of awakening, okay, there are other emotions that are virtuous and positive that are not considered klesha and are praised because they bring happy results in the long term and motivate virtuous actions. Okay, so it's a different way of thinking. In the Buddhist way, your thinking is what favors liberation and what hinders liberation. In the Western way of thinking about emotion is what makes me feel good now and what makes me feel unhappy now. So very different criteria there. So you have different lists and structures and ways of categorizing things. As such, kleshas are obscurations on the path to liberation, and Buddhist texts speak of their disadvantages and the antidotes to them. However, there is no English equivalent to the word klesha that encompasses mental factors as diverse as emotions, attitudes, philosophical views, and innate, unquestioned assumptions about ourselves and the world. For the sake of simplicity in this series, we translate klesha as afflictions and sometimes expand it to say disturbing emotions and wrong views, or afflicted views, or distorted views. Some afflictions, such as the view of a personal identity, are called views in English, while others, for example, anger and jealousy, are called emotions. Mental states, such as not believing that awakening is possible, are called views. So all of those things are put into the category of klesha. And we don't have an English word that would translate klesha. All people have the same types of emotions and similar attitudes and views about the way they feel and the world exists, some of which are conducive for long-term happiness and peace, others of which are hindrances. However, the words we use to speak of them and the concepts that influence how we relate to them vary. Similarly, the behaviors motivated by certain emotions will be socially acceptable in some cultures, but not in others. Yeah. For example, sticking out our tongue, which is a sign of friendliness and respect in Tibetan culture, is discouraged in Western cultures, while clapping our hands, a sign of being pleased in Western cultures, indicates aversion and suspicion in Tibetan culture. Okay. And we can see so much in our foreign policy. What brings us problems is we don't understand other cultures and what is socially acceptable in those cultures and what isn't. Yeah. And so we go in with our cultural view of how things should be and try and put that on another culture. Now, in some ways, we could say that would bring happiness, when we're talking about human rights, for example, if other cultures had more human rights. But the process of telling other cultures you have to have human rights is often going to lead to a lot of friction. Yeah, and a lot of misunderstanding in the process. Yeah, you can't push things on other cultures in a way that actually works. Mm-hmm. And also, some of the things that we look at other cultures and say, oh, so bad, they're actually going on in our cultures too. Yeah? But we just don't notice them in our culture because they're socially acceptable. How those views come out in our culture, socially acceptable, we don't notice it. How they come out in other cultures, socially acceptable for their culture, not socially acceptable for our culture, so we notice it. Also, within any culture, certain behaviors or certain attitudes in different groups are considered acceptable or unacceptable. So even one culture, you don't have some homogeneous thing that's going on. But we all want happiness and none of us want suffering. We all have attachment. We all have compassion, okay? The words used to label emotions have many nuances. In addition, there may not always be an exact correspondence in meaning between the Sanskrit or Tibetan word and the English term used to translate it. When reading Buddhist works in English, we must take care not to impute the ordinary meaning of a word onto a term that has a specific meaning in the Buddhist context, like the word feeling, okay, or like the word faith. Yeah, what faith means in English is not the usual meaning of in Buddhism, what faith means. Okay, so there's many kinds of words like this. And that's why it's important to really learn what the words mean. Yeah. And not just think we understand what they are.
A couple from online. One is, how are we to treat life when everything feels infinitely void, as though all actions are pointless, altruistic, or selfish?
But I didn't understand the last part. Are all actions?
As though all actions are pointless, altruistic, or selfish.
I'm sorry, I don't really understand that. Not all actions are pointless. Not all of them are altruistic, and not all of them are selfish.
You're missing a colon, I think.
Huh?
You're missing a colon or in dash. All actions are
Pointless, dash.
or destructive or whatever.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Not all actions are any of those three. Yeah, our actions matter. Our actions are not pointless.
how are we to treat life when everything feels infinitely void? Was the first.
Okay. So, yeah, so I would need more understanding of what it means that life feels infinitely void. Does it just mean like you feel like you have no purpose in your life? And what does that mean? No personal purpose, no long-term purpose. To really answer that question, I would have to discuss with the person what act, and so I had a better feeling of what they're actually trying to communicate. Yeah. But I should say, our actions matter and our lives matter, and things are not pointless. Ever. Yeah.
And another question was acknowledging that it's a bit off topic, but relating to the political stuff at the beginning was, I was wondering about your views on the men's rights activists versus feminism debates.
So the men's rights activists, meaning?
Those who are advocating, I think, for innocent until proven guilty for Kavanaugh.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, advocating for innocent until proven guilty is fine. I think that's an issue that's very different from the Me Too issue. I think the Me Too issue is bringing awareness to the way harm is inflicted when many, not all men, but some men are not aware of how harm is inflicted to women. That's what the Me Too is about. The Me Too is not about blaming all men and telling them they're all sexual perverts. That's not what Me Too is about. And I don't think Me Too is about, just you make an accusation and then everybody, agrees with it. I think Me Too is drawing attention to, okay, people are harmed and we need to look at how they're harmed. Yeah. I think that's what Me Too's about. And the thing, what I think some politicians are doing is they're making, I'm going to use Donnie as an example. He sees himself as a victim of false allegations. Even when he has admitted doing that behavior himself, he doesn't see it as negative behavior. He doesn't see it as harmful. He sees himself as a victim because people have been pointing out that behavior and saying that has resulted in harm. Okay, so that kind of thing is something entirely different. I mean, his issue is not being able to take an accurate ethical inventory of himself. The Me Too movement is, about something different. It's saying, there's harm happening and we need to recognize this harm and not just sweep it under the rug or say that it's okay. Things have been going on like this for many centuries. We all know that, women just have to put up with, boys will be boys. Yeah, this is the way men are. When you're a wife, this is what you have to be and expect. That now people are saying, wait a minute, there's a lot of suffering involved in that attitude and that behavior. Yeah. I think that's what Me Too is doing. Me Too isn't out to blame all men and ostracize all men and, that kind of thing. I don't think that's what it's about. Yeah, so if you say everybody deserves due process, the women deserve due process when they're making a statement, rather than having it brushed off and said, you're mistaken, your memory's wrong, you don't know what you're saying, you were drunk, So,
Black men deserve due process.
Yeah, and the men also deserve.
Deserve due process.
Yeah.
Not to be dying in our
take your, yeah. Everybody deserves, yeah. Say that again.
Saying that everyone deserves due process. The people dying in our immigration centers and not having even a decent standard of health care as they're being, put in these places in the United States of America. Young black men who are being killed in our society deserve due process, and their cases. Women do, men do. There's no one who doesn't deserve due process. This is a matter of human dignity.
Yeah.
That's what that's at stake here.
Yes. Yes, I agree with you. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I would wonder about sort of men's rights. What does that really mean? And I would maybe put forward that, is it more about retaining entitlement as opposed to rights, and not examining what has been happening, the deep privilege and entitlement in the past, but actually calling that rights or calling it due process. I think rights would be a very contested word in this case.
Yeah. So you're saying it's important to differentiate rights and feelings of entitlement.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we shouldn't get those two things confused. Yeah, they're quite different.
The person online says, I agree, but I also think we should pay attention to men who have experienced domestic violence, sexual violence, and bad things from gender roles.
Oh, yeah.
Like about male disability.
Yes. Yes. In fact, we saw a film here at the Abbey, the one of the masks we wear. No, what? The Mass We Live In, which is about, it's a very moving movie, video documentary, that is about the kind of conditioning men have that trap them in their gender roles and how they suffer from that kind of conditioning. So that's also something I think very important that needs to be discussed in society. How we create gender roles, even starting when kids are 2 and 3, for little girls and for little boys, and how damaging those roles and expectations can be for both sexes.